2 billion people might be displaced due to climate change by 2100.
Welcome to The Executives, the show where we navigate in the intricate world of executive leadership, exploring strategies, insights, and personal stories of successful professionals shaping the global business landscape. I'm your host, Majid, and today we have someone joining with a lot of experience in startups. Usman Iftikhar is the co-founder and CEO of Catalysr, an Australian startup incubator for migrant and refugee entrepreneurs, which has supported over 900 individuals since 2016 and is recognized by the UN. He holds various roles, including venture partner at Backbone Partners, head of growth and partnership at SpaceBase, and has also been involved in numerous entrepreneurial programs and initiatives. Usman has received multiple accolades for his work, including the 2018 Commonwealth Young Person of the Year, winner of the 2020 40 Under 40 Most Influential Asian Australian Leadership Awards in Entrepreneurship, and the Western Sydney Champion Award in 2021, among other prestigious recognitions. I am happy to welcome Usman. Hello and welcome to the show, Usman.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the introduction. And one thing that you've missed in the intro, that we both went to the same university back in Pakistan, I think over 10 years ago now, the GIK Institute, and that's how we know each other.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It was a good 4 years. I remember it was a nice 4 years. So, Usman, I'm very grateful for your time. I'm very thankful. So, can you kindly introduce yourself more? I was struggling creating an introduction for you because I saw the list and everything you have been doing and have done so far. I would love that you also share some more insights about yourself for our listeners.
Yeah, so thank you again for having me. And for me, I guess my journey, as I guess many entrepreneurs would say this, it's not a straight line. There's always been this kind of, up and down, left, right, these kind of different interesting, I guess, things that I've been doing. And most of that has been, driven by curiosity, but also because of, I guess, circumstances. So as I mentioned that I'm from Pakistan, like you are, and I studied in Pakistan, did an engineering degree, then came here to Australia to do a master's back in 2013 with really this kind of, mindset that I wanted to do a master's in engineering and management. And then after studying here, I wanted to kind of get a good job and work here. And that was, that's something that many people, who, immigrate and look forward to do. But for me, I guess what I found after studying in Australia initially was really, really hard to get into meaningful employment. So, I was working at a 7-Eleven or driving an Uber, the casual roles that many people do, but was quite frustrated. And again, this wasn't just my story. There were so many people like me who were doing the same thing. So I initially decided that I want to do a PhD. Quickly realized that wasn't really something for me. And then I went into business. I wanted to start a clean tech startup originally that failed. So I think that's really important to kind of talk about failure. And then through that journey, kind of learned a lot of lessons, particularly around how to solve a problem and rather than just kind of create any business. I got accepted into a social entrepreneurship incubator program in Western Sydney. This was back in 2015, 2016, where I learned about, how do you start a startup, particularly a social enterprise, because I was kind of socially minded. I wanted to solve a particular problem. And through that, this kind of problem was staring me in the face, which was this particular issue that exists in Australia, but I'm sure in Europe and many other countries it's the same thing, which is unemployment and especially underemployment that is faced by many immigrants and refugees who move to a different country. And for me, I was like, hang on, I'm a person who's part of the story, but there are 60% of people who move to Australia every year. This is kind of back in 2016, who were, struggling to find meaningful employment, which is a huge number compared to the national average, about 5-10%. So I decided, look, I want to start a business. I'm in an incubator, so wouldn't it be great if we had an incubator just like this for many other immigrants and refugees? So what you mentioned, Catalysr was a company or a social enterprise that I co-founded back in 2016 with this mindset that whatever I'm learning, I want to kind of share with other people from immigrant backgrounds. Had absolutely no idea what I was doing, to be very honest and frank. Like many entrepreneurs, when you kind of jump off and then try to kind of build a plane and fly it at the same time. And so I guess through that process in the early days in 2016, when we ran our pilot, the 3 people or the 10 people that we supported in our initial pilot, 3 of them started a business. And that gave me and my co-founder a lot of confidence that what we were doing was something that was actually needed and that people needed a bit of support. And even though we didn't really know what we were doing at that early stage, just by providing some confidence and some kind of networking and some early, I guess, workshops, those people were able to start their own business and kind of set up their own life. And so for me, that gave me a lot of motivation and encouragement and validation. And so I have been doing that for the last 8 years now. As you mentioned, we've supported over 900 entrepreneurs from migrant and refugee backgrounds. What I'm really proud of is that they're a really diverse group. So about 87 different countries where they've come from, and about 46% of them are actually women, which is really great because in the startup ecosystem, oftentimes, we see this kind of gender imbalance. And so this is one of those things that we're really proud of, that we're able to support people from all different cultures, different backgrounds, areas, which is also an interesting, challenging journey as well. But I've spent a lot of time learning from other people, bringing in lots of new mentors who've helped us to build that. And that's been kind of my main focus. And then I've also spent time in getting back into engineering, so doing some work in clean tech, done a bit of work with government, with kind of impact investing, VC, just, space tech, whatever I can get my hands on. But my sort of main focus still has been on Catalysr.
That's very impressive, to say the least. It's amazing. Like, you started with failure, and then you also had multiple ups and downs. That is the entire reason why I started this podcast, that I want to talk about not only the successes, but also the failures. Oftentimes people misunderstand or don't visualize the stress that you have to go through if you're an executive, or if you have to make key decisions, that can actually impact people plus companies. And in your case, you're solving problems that are societal, So basically, these also impact the society. So our topic that we have for today is Innovating at the Edge: a journey through space, resilience, and global entrepreneurship. Now, so 3 topics that like completely different, but I feel that you're the perfect person that we can talk about. For example, about space tech. I've been trying to read about space tech here and there, but whenever you try to see, it's always these big names coming up: Richard, or Elon Musk, or Jeff Bezos. So it's always these 3 guys popping up, So it's also good to understand that what exactly is the reason, or why are you getting involved with space tech. So let's start with the first thing. What kind of problems have you actually solved with Catalysr? These 900 individuals who actually built businesses, right? So what kind of businesses did they have? Like, can you give us some examples?
Yeah. So in terms of the problems that we're solving, I guess, recognizing that if you want to, if you move to a new country, I know you've done the same thing. So have I. The kind of challenges you face when you want to set up, initially you just want to find a house, get a job, those kind of basic things. But particularly if you want to start a business, you face a lot of challenges. So for any kind of business, you need to have a network. So you need a network so you can find your customers. You need a network so you can understand, where you can hire people from. You need a network when you want to raise capital. So network is one of those key things. You also need to be able to understand how the business environment works, what the regulation is, what some of the, I guess, taxes you have to pay, which is another key thing, and kind of all the legal stuff. And then you also need to be able to find the right kind of people who can support you and encourage you. Because as you know, with many different cultures and backgrounds, they're not always all supportive of business, because it's a risky endeavor. If you don't have the role models or inspiration, it's very hard for you to get started and believe in yourself. So it's kind of creating the right kind of community, providing them with the resources and helping them. So those are the kind of problems that we're trying to solve with that. And we do that through different programs, by connecting people to mentors, by helping them opening doors in terms of funding, giving a little bit of funding ourselves, but also connecting with other funders. But really, the way that I see Catalyzr's role is it's kind of like if you go into a hospital, you see a triage nurse or someone who you speak to, and then they'll tell you, we'll send you to a specialist, or we'll send you this way, or whatever. That's kind of our role in the startup ecosystem, or the enterprise ecosystem in Australia. Anyone who comes in from a migrant background or refugee background, wants to learn about business or start their business, they can be a part of our programs. It's a not-for-profit, so it's completely free. And then they can learn through that and then go into, I guess, building the kind of business they want to build. So if they want to build a social enterprise, if they want to be in a tech startup, or if they want to build a small business, there are different pathways that obviously they will have to follow, whether that's in terms of capital raising or the kind of, I guess, support organizations that they will go to. And so we'll try and facilitate that through different programs and kind of mentoring and networking.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially we've had, so when you asked about success stories or just generally kind of people that have gone through, we've had a really diverse set of people in terms of not just the backgrounds that they've come from, but the kind of business ideas they've come with. And one of the core reasons is because we don't tell them what to focus on. They bring in their why or their kind of business. We help them with the process and kind of helping them open doors. So we've had people who've started businesses that are more social enterprise type businesses. So, example, there's one company called Humanism. We have a founder in Australia. She's originally from India, and she has a company in India where she actually educates women from low socioeconomic backgrounds to learn about textiles, and then build those textiles and then directly sell them for conferences and kind of bigger events here in Australia. And that way, it's both learning and financial education and helping them get into a better job. So there's a kind of whole social enterprise model there. They've got a company similar in Australia called Creative Cooperative, which is helping women of color that are based in Australia to learn about digital skills and then get into jobs there, but also get into entrepreneurship as well. But then on the other hand, we've got some really deep tech businesses as well. So a business that is using AI to kind of disrupt the property market called AI Prop. We've got a company called Spiral Blue, which is created new processors to improve the data processing capability of satellites. And they've actually launched physically their hardware into space, and they have tested that with SpaceX and a couple of others. So it's a really, really diverse group of people. And again, I can name you many different types of businesses in clean tech, in space tech, in AI, but also in many different kind of impact. Some that are more kind of national focused, some on mental health, disability, energy. So it really depends. Yes, it's a big, big group of people that we've been able to kind of really privileged to support, actually.
I can imagine 900 people, 900 businesses. It's a big number. It's easy to say that you have supported 900 businesses. Imagine if these 900 businesses, let's say even 10% succeed, right? Keeping a low margin, that means 90 businesses succeeded and each of them hire about 100 people. So 90 to 100 is 9,000 people hired locally, given that all of them are based in Australia. That's basically a big number, and then out of these 9,000, maybe more will start also businesses and so on. So it's a really brilliant initiative, and I think it is very much needed because we need to do more things for the society as well, more good things for the society. You mentioned this in your introduction about space tech. What actually inspired you to completely from society to space tech, completely different. So what inspired you?
So, I mean, as you know, we're both engineers and we always love technology. So that's kind of, I guess, one general inspiration. But secondly, I was really lucky and privileged that I got an opportunity to do a program at Singularity University. So Singularity University is this fantastic organization. They're not a university. They're called Singularity University, but they're an organization that supports entrepreneurship and tech really at the cutting edge. They're based out of the US, and they're actually based at the NASA Ames Research Center in California. So back in 2017, I applied like many other people and was one of the 90 people that was selected on a scholarship to go to the US, live there for about 3 months and learn about entrepreneurship and kind of, basically suck in all that amazing energy and learnings from Silicon Valley. And I think one of the key things was that, they selected us because they wanted us to look at how we can use technology to solve problems and help a billion people. So that was kind of their thinking. They're still focused on the society, but using technology as a lever as well. So the latest technology like AI, 3D printing, space, etc. And the key, I guess, initiative at that time, or the, I guess, overarching theme that they were looking at was climate change and how you can think about solving climate change. So when I went into that program, initially my thinking was, and it's still continuing, is, we are supporting migrants and refugees right now, but obviously, that's a very small number of people that we're supporting here in Australia. We want to do that internationally, and we know with climate change, we only see more migration. And so, as you know, unfortunately, the rhetoric around migration is quite negative, where part of this is migrants are coming in or taking our jobs, or migrants are not integrating our societies. Those are kind of two main, I guess, reasons that you hear from people. Particularly, you're based in Europe, so that's even more solid there. But we've had the same thing in Australia. So we wanted to demonstrate that we can solve that problem by showing if migrants are coming in and they're starting businesses, they're creating jobs for other people. And when you look at climate change creating a lot of migration, and there's some studies that show that up to 2 billion people might be displaced due to climate change by 2100. That's a mind-boggling number. Like that's, when you think about it, that's like 1 in or 2 in 10 people, essentially, if you have a 10 to 11 billion population by 2100. So we're not ready for that, right? Even currently with the migration levels we have globally, we're struggling. Many people are in refugee camps. They struggle with work rights and so on. So I want to do something in that sector, right? And that's why I applied. That's why I got in. When I went there and I was looking at different kind of technologies and learning about the stuff, I was always interested and fascinated about space, particularly coming from Pakistan. We haven't had as much exposure to space tech. But something that really hit me in the face was this point that when you think about space technology or space industry, particularly 5-10 years ago from now, you would always think about the old space, which is like these big rockets and like billions of dollars of missions and so on. And some of them are still happening, if you want to go to the Mars or further on. But actually, the space industry and the commercial space industry has become a lot cheaper now because of reusable rockets that obviously SpaceX is doing, and the size and the in terms of like microcontrollers or microcomputers and nanocomputers that we have, and reduction of size of satellites. So you can essentially launch a satellite for a couple of $100,000 these days, which is not as expensive, particularly if you're in a country like Australia or the US. So the costs have come down, but still the accessibility isn't there because obviously if you don't have the launch providers, if you don't have the right kind of infrastructure, it's very hard for you to participate in space. But space, as we know, is a great area for innovation. So you can learn, you can have specific technologies like solar panels is a great example, but they're used in space, and then now we've got all that research really helping us on the planet. Similarly, you can look at GPS. You can look at so many examples of space technology and how that's really transformed our world. And so whatever kind of, I guess, research is happening in space can really help here. But also you can utilize space, particularly the kind of low Earth orbit, to look at the Earth and understand, what's happening with agriculture, what's happening with mining, what's happening with water, disaster management, all those kind of different things right now. And so in terms of climate change, space can play a big role. But because there's not as much access, something that I wanted to set up was this organization, again, with the focus on society, to really look at solving the problem of making space more accessible and really democratizing it, right? So it's not just in the hand, the technology is not just in the hand of a few organizations or a few countries, but actually more people, because it's affordable. So the cost is not as much of a barrier now as it was before, but the know-how, the capability isn't there. And so that's why I kind of started on this journey initially. I've got some couple of amazing mentors who helped me. One of them was actually someone who designed the International Space Station, who I met there in the US. So him, Eric Dahlstrom, and Emily Dahlstrom, they created a new company called SpaceBase. They were part of a fellowship, actually, and they went from the US to New Zealand because they had the kind of same mission, and they wanted to prototype or test this idea in New Zealand, where they wanted to see, can they help New Zealand kind of and build their own space ecosystem in terms of space technology, space entrepreneurship, and they've been doing different workshops at high school level, university levels, running different competitions, challenges, and so on. And so I've joined them to help them grow that beyond New Zealand. So what they're doing in New Zealand is really fantastic. How can we take that to Australia, to Europe, to other countries? And so I'm not doing the deep technology kind of things on space, but really looking at how do we make space education, I guess, more accessible, make it more democratic, and really make sure that more people can participate in space, because that way everyone can benefit from that. So hopefully that helps kind of understand the kind of inspiration as well as where we've been.
Maybe explain a little bit more about SpaceBase. What exactly is it? Also like an incubator, or is it like? I understand they take technology, they want to inspire or give the technology to people, but how? I mean,
Great question. So SpaceBase does a few things. They have, I guess, their consulting arm. So they consult with different governments and help them with their strategies. So, as I said, with New Zealand, that's one of the examples. They help with local government level as well. So they will run workshops for industry to help them understand how they can utilize space technology, what are the things they can do. They also sort of educate high school students, university students as well, on how they can use space as a vehicle, as a tool to for entrepreneurship or to solve problems. They run competitions and challenges, which is something that I've been personally a part of, which is look at a particular problem and then see how space tech can be used to solve that problem. And they ran some generic competitions for a few years. And in the last couple of years, I've been really proud to be involved in this program called Space for Planet Earth, which is looking at satellite data and how we can use that to understand climate change and how we can use that to basically mitigate climate change and things like that. So they started that initially in New Zealand in their year one. Then they also expanded that to New Zealand, Australia, and the Pacific Islands. And so that also, I guess, really gives an opportunity for different teams, so university level, startup level, to participate. The teams that win the competition also get incubator support that they run, plus they then get access to funding. So they help with connecting with VCs as well. So there's a lot of different things they do. But the goal really is to build that space ecosystem. So they've done that in New Zealand for the last 5 years, I'd say, by doing all these kind of different things. And now they're looking to grow that internationally.
Okay. And is it currently present in Europe as well, or no? It's US and then Australia, Sydney, and Asia Pacific.
So the work that SpaceBase specifically is doing is in New Zealand, but they've got kind of counterparts, other organizations similar to them that are doing similar work in other countries, or in Europe as well. I'm not, I guess, too connected with what's happening in Europe specifically. I know this European Space Agency sponsors a lot of stuff. There's kind of other, I guess, initiatives that are out there. But I guess the unique thing that SpaceBase has is they're really focusing on people who don't have access to space technology. So in Europe, obviously, you do have access to space, versus if you go to, say, Southeast Asia in some of the countries, or, like you go to Pakistan as an example. Yes, we've got some satellites and launches, but broadly speaking, we don't have that understanding or that access. And or Pacific Islands is an example. Philippines is another area that they're working in. So different countries where it's not been traditionally kind of accessible. That's what they're kind of doing, and those are people that are already trying to support.
And you already mentioned a few challenges, like space is not accessible, right? But what challenges have you encountered while innovating in the space sector, or while trying to take this initiative, for example, to New Zealand or Australia?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of challenges when it comes to space because it's an old sector, number one. Secondly, as you know or might know, that space is what we call like dual use technology. So it can be used for kind of commercial and civil use, but can also be used for military, right? And so the challenge with that is, and there's a lot of regulation that's present, particularly with the US. They have what's called ITAR, which is kind of this arms regulations, which obviously makes sense generally for arms. But for them, they have this where, like you can't export technologies and space. Most of space technologies kind of come under that domain, which can be really challenging because if you've got some particular technology, you can't just transfer it to another country. Obviously, there's geopolitics that are at play. So there's also like for example, you want to work with China or other countries. There's also challenges there. But what I would say is that in terms of education, that's I guess an area where people are okay with kind of supporting each other and being a bit more, I guess, accessible. But when it comes to actual physically building technology or launching it and stuff, there's a lot more barriers and regulation that exists, which is still unfortunate, but that's something that exists. I guess in Europe, it's a bit easier than the US. New Zealand is trying to make it a lot more accessible, not just for New Zealand companies, but other people that are coming to New Zealand. So that's been a good thing. The other challenge, I guess, has been funding. So because what SpaceBase is doing is also kind of, there's no specific blueprint to that. Like if you're trying to build a rocket, if you're trying to launch satellites, you've got specific blueprints of what that might look like. What they're trying to do is they're trying to build a whole ecosystem, and really it's sort of on that experimental basis to begin with in New Zealand. So funding is one of those things where who's the right funder? Do you make it independent and just like have a consulting model? Do you have it as a company that's kind of a not for profit? And all those kind of different things have come up. And so it's been quite interesting to kind of work with different people. Also, just making sure that what you're doing also actually has an impact. So it's not just purely from a perspective of okay, we're just going out there and we're telling people, look how cool is space, but actually not just helping them understand the benefit from space that they can have, but also learn how they can apply it in their own context, right? So if there's a high school team or university team, physically getting them access to space data, helping them solve a problem, and then really learn that skill, because then they can take it either into their own startup, or if they go and work in an industry, they can also do that as well, right? So it's like helping people into that and really measuring that impact as well, which is quite challenging sometimes. So quite a few different things that I guess we've been working on.
These are all critical challenges that we need that could exist, right? But technology has been advancing really rapidly in the last 2 years with ChatGPT, with AI evolving. Things have started going like really fast, So how has this like ChatGPT or AI in general, affected your approach towards the whole space tech scene?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, I guess ChatGPT is really the tip of the iceberg, right? When we see what's happening in kind of the AI world, whether that's generative AI in general or particularly LLM specifically, there is so much potential that exists in that sector, right? Whether it's simple things like, just doing a media release or whatever, but then also doing more complex tasks. I think we are just still in that experimental phase of like trying to test and try what works, what doesn't work. So I guess at the current stage, it hasn't had that much of an impact, but I feel like in the next little while, so probably in the next 5-10 years, we'll see a huge impact. AI has been, I guess, applied in space for probably the last 10-20 years, if not longer. And specifically when it comes to Earth observation, that's one of the things, or even in astronomy and other areas where you collect a lot of data. And whenever you collect data, you can obviously kind of apply machine learning onto it. It used to be statistics, now it's machine learning, and really looking at patterns, looking at different things. If you're kind of monitoring the Earth, for example, there's lots of different things that you can look at, and AI can play a huge role there. And so those are the kind of areas that definitely AI has played a role, particularly when it comes to imagery. For example, one of the companies that Catalysr actually supported was Spiral Blue, which I mentioned, that was improving the data processing capability of satellites. But they were looking kind of using that to then understand like how machine learning can help detect piracy in the ocean by looking at from satellites in space of like particular pirate ships, their movement, etc. You can do the same thing by looking at carbon emissions and seeing where there's more carbon emissions, where there's less, natural causes, kind of like human emissions in terms of like power plants, etc. So there's a lot that AI can do in terms of imagery and kind of that kind of stuff. But in terms of ChatGPT and generative AI, I think that's very new still. Space is moving quite fast, but also it's quite traditional. It's got an interesting industry, but I definitely see that there's a lot of opportunities there, and people can really apply that in the next little while.
Interesting. This all makes sense. Now I'm just thinking, in the beginning, you were explaining about Catalysr doing sustainability projects in the clean tech and so on. And then we are talking about space tech. Normally, when you see these videos from rockets flying into the space, they don't seem super eco-friendly. Let's put it that way. So how do you integrate sustainable practices, or how do you ensure that something that the startups or the companies are doing is actually sustainable into space tech?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say there's a few different things to it. So one is in terms of there's not many companies that actually build rockets and send rockets, right? So outside of national government, SpaceX is the one, and then there's a couple of others that have kind of been successful in doing that. Rocket Lab in New Zealand. So it's really, really hard to do that, right? I think New Zealand specifically, where SpaceBase has been based, has had a big focus generally as a country on sustainability, and they are kind of moving forward with that idea of sustainable space. Now, in terms of rockets and the kind of emissions from that, there are companies that are researching and coming up with solutions that are more, I guess, environmentally friendly, the kind of fuels that they will use for rocketry. But that's not a short-term, I guess, current problem. That's more of a future problem because we don't have as many rockets going as, we have cars and all those kind of things when you look at the kind of actual numbers. The bigger issue is really space debris, which is this issue that, like you have satellites that are up there, and if and when they stop working, and some of the older kind of rocket pieces as well, then those are the things that will keep going, and eventually you are in the situation where space becomes really, I guess, like it's really saturated. I mean, it's still a large area of space, but still like things are moving really, really fast, and so you don't want them to collide because then like that can create a lot of problems, and there can be issues. But then also, it's one of those things where it's just not sustainable to do it that way. And so there are a few different things that are happening in that sector. From a rockets perspective, obviously with what SpaceX is doing it to make rockets reusable, you kind of reduce the actual physical rockets being in space that are kind of left there. In terms of satellites themselves, the smaller satellites that are being launched now are more, I guess, they deorbit after a little while because they're in sort of lower orbits. Secondly, they're smaller and they're cheaper, so you can kind of bend them into the atmosphere and they're not, I guess, left there forever, which is a good thing. But then also there are different technologies that are being worked on. Some are kind of collecting space debris. Some are powering satellites from here. So if satellites kind of lost power, like using lasers and other kind of things. So there's a lot of kind of new research that are happening in the sector. So sustainable space is a huge thing in Australia and New Zealand, and there are many kind of research that are happening there. I definitely think that that's something we need to work on, both on the rocket fuel side, but also on this kind of, I guess, other industries. I think broadly speaking, another thing to think about is space as a tool or as a, I guess, vehicle to really understand climate change and solve some of these other problems. And so that's where, it's in the short term, it can play a really big role in sustainability. So with space, you can actually monitor the whole planet, right? And really, it's kind of like the thermometer of the Earth. You can understand where temperature is happening. And we already do that, with our weather satellites and things like that. But really getting into the next stage where, you have what's now called LiDAR. And so really understanding through lasers and through other kind of technology, understanding how specifically, the kind of ecosystem is changing, the planet's changing, the climate's changing, what kind of crops we should plant, how we should deal with disasters. Those are the kind of things that I think we can do a lot more with climate, both mitigation but also adaptation. So from a sustainability lens, I think that's where it can play a bigger role at this stage, even in terms of like where you should have cities or, people living. You can again do that through space. So particularly looking at areas where you should have solar panels. Now there are companies that can help you kind of understand, where you should put solar panels, things like that, using space or satellite technology. So there's a lot that you can do in that sector. But I feel like the footprint itself of or carbon footprint itself of the space industry is not that huge at the moment because there's just not much. But obviously that will become a problem in the future if we don't solve it. But I know companies that are working on that from a perspective of what uses it have. I guess most of the people, even if they want to solve problems using space, they're not necessarily putting their own satellites up or putting their own rockets up, but they're actually using the existing data that's out there. So there's a really good company in Australia called Arlula. Highly recommend people going and checking that out. What they do is they, with different kind of satellites that are owned by governments or different companies, they are tasked to do a particular mission, right? So a particular satellite might have a mission to look at a particular country or a particular kind of asset or whatever it is, right? When they're sort of going around the Earth essentially, but then for the rest of the time they're kind of just going around and they're not really doing anything. And so what this company is doing is they kind of like Airbnb, they're renting, I guess, spots on the satellite when they're not really utilizing their time, and so to do extra photos, and then they can sell those photos or they can sell their data to other players who can then build solutions, apps, etc. on it, right? So there's a lot of these interesting business models that you can apply with existing infrastructure. So obviously there's new infrastructure, but even for the existing one, there's so much potential that exists that I think many people don't think about that you can apply, and that's where sustainability can play a huge role.
That's true. That's very interesting. Now let's make the mood a little lighter. We have been talking about space tech a lot. So let's start with, how does your normal day look like? Let's say you wake up in the morning at 2:30, of course, because you sleep at 2 and you wake up at 2:30.
It's one of those questions where, like it's hard to answer that because no single day is the same. Just because, I mean, especially I think after COVID, before COVID, there was a bit more, I guess, standardization. After COVID, I'm mostly working from home, sometimes kind of going into the office or co-working spaces. But I would say like an average day, there's no specific time. It depends on when my meeting is. So sometimes it's like 8 a.m., sometimes it's like 10 a.m. But I'm normally kind of awake by 10, so not too late, but I do sleep late. An average day would be kind of, lots of emails. I think many of us do. Some project management work, whether it's company like Space or investing or Catalysr, running events is another one, or working with other people speaking in different places. And then also, I guess, thinking about new projects or collaborations is another one that I've been doing. So yeah, it's hard. There's no average day. It's kind of different things depending on, what's on the radar.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Like apart from the whole investing, managing Catalysr and SpaceBase and so on, do you have time for some fun activity, like maybe gaming or, I don't know, traveling or something else?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is one of those things where currently I'm a lot better at doing this now. When I started in this world of kind of startups and tech, I was really, really bad and kind of burnt out after a couple of years. But right now, I've been playing cricket a lot. So, I mean, the benefit of being in Australia is, Australia is really big on cricket and kind of there's great cricket. It's got a T20 cricket. So I play a lot of that on the weekends. That's one, which is really good for health, but also good fun with different people. I play PlayStation a lot as well when I can. So that's another one that just is good. I'm watching a lot of TV shows, animes, that kind of stuff. So I do take a lot of downtime as well, which I know it sounds counterintuitive to people, but like I try to take at the very least Sunday off, or at least one day in the week off. And then I'll sort of make up some other time, like 2-3 hours every day when I'm awake, and to do some kind of casual, social, fun activity, because I feel that actually makes you more productive when you are working. Otherwise, if you're just working, then it's really, really hard to keep your focus. And also, like you're trying to solve some particular problem, but, like if you work too hard, it doesn't solve that problem. That's what I found personally for me. Other people might have a different kind of regime, but I feel like if I'm well rested, if I take a break, if I go out for a walk, do something fun, I'm more likely to be more productive. So I definitely try to take at least one day off a week, sometimes, 2 days off for other kind of activities as well. Do a lot of kind of what is known as hiking in the rest of the world, but in Australia called bushwalking. Go to different areas. Oftentimes, I mean, currently where I'm living, we don't have a beach, but prior to that, we had a nearby beach. So go to the beach, go for a swim, things like that, whatever I can do essentially just for fun. There's definitely see friends, do a barbecue. Again, we've got a very outdoorsy culture here in Australia, so those are the kind of things that I do a lot.
Yeah, I know. I'm all my friends who are in Australia, like I'm seeing them like grilling all the time, and here it's like minus 10 degrees, and they are like out grilling. I'm like, the weather is grilling us here, and you're grilling.
Yeah, I mean, it's also different parts of the world in terms of the time of the year, right? Like. But I mean, it doesn't get as cold in Australia as it probably does in Germany generally. But in like June, July, when you're enjoying the summer, it's winter here, so it's the opposite then.
Yeah, that's true. But how cold does the winter get normally? Like, is it extremely cold?
It depends on, I guess, where you're based. I mean, generally in Australia, not that cold. So I would probably say in like 4 or 5, like 10 degrees Celsius, which is not cold at all. Like it's not snowing in most of Australia. It's very dry, very kind of sea level type. And then there's some kind of mountainous areas where it does snow. It goes into the negative, but probably again like -5, -10, doesn't go below that even in those areas. But not many people live there. People either go there for travel or for kind of just leisure stuff. But most of Australia, I mean, and I'm talking about mainland Australia, not Tasmania, which is another kind of island in the south, that gets colder. But most of mainland Australia, so Sydney, Melbourne, these kind of bigger cities, yeah, it doesn't get that cold. So it's quite pleasant, but it does get hot. So it gets up to 40, 45 degrees in the summer as well.
Okay. That's still good. That's still 4, 5, 10 degrees is good. Like I can go outside 10 degrees. End of November last year was like -12, -13 degrees. So you had to wear so many things, you felt like a fluffy panda walking outside.
Yeah, and I mean, and you're in Germany, like if you look at people in Canada, Russia, other places, or even in Norway, then they will say, yeah, -12 is fine. So it's all relative, right?
That's nothing. That's nothing. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I remember one of my friends, she's in Canada, and I was talking with her. She was like, yeah, I had to dig down snow, because the snow was like till the door. So when I opened the door, there was just snow like in front of the door. So she had to go out through the other side to remove snow from the door.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. That's just too much.
That is too much for me as well. Like, I mean, here it snows, but it's manageable. It's like a little bit. Maybe in Munich it gets a little bit more snowy, but here it's still better. I mean, but it's all good. So tell us about how have your experiences shaped your approach to building resilience, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where, like, you reflect on how far back do you want me to go? Like, some people are going to go all the way to the, childhood. I think for me, like one of my, I guess, really young memories was back in Pakistan. This is back in 2005. I was my dad used to be a doctor in the army, so we were based in Abbottabad, as you know, where like the whole big earthquake happened. And so I was about 15 at the time, and had like three young siblings because both my parents were actually doctors, and so when the earthquake happened, they went to the hospital. They spent like days and nights in the hospital, and then we were there to not just fend for ourselves, but also really to be able to support other people that are coming in from different smaller regions to Abbottabad, to be kind of taking care of them for all the kind of, I guess, clothes and food and shelter and everything. So I guess that was like very early days of training on how to think about not just personal resilience, but also helping other people and kind of have that service community mindset. I think the second one was going to a boarding school. So during kind of high school, I went to a boarding school in Islamabad, which is another one that helped. Then going to Jiki was another big one. And then spending time 4 years in a sort of grilling university environment with some really smart people, but also which was a lot of fun. But also we had to be switched on 24/7, which was great training for, I guess, for the rest of life. And then coming to Australia, coming to a new country was another kind of point there in building that personal resilience, professional resilience, particularly, I guess, at the time where, when you study, you've got to study, you've also got to work, and kind of, manage your expenses, which is a different experience when you're coming from a country like Pakistan, where your kind of parents oftentimes or family takes care of you to kind of just be completely independent financially. So that was kind of an interesting thing. Then going from there to starting a business and kind of running that. So I think there's been like every step of the way, there's been some learning, some failure, some resilience that are built in. I think there's a lot of scar tissue that we normally say that you've got to go through different things in life, and then that's what it, I guess, builds on. But yeah, I feel like just lots of different experiences that have helped me build that resilience.
Interesting. And now, building on top of that, could you share maybe some milestones in your career that were actually pivotal to your current success?
Again, this is such a hard one, right? It's like, what is a like you're doing a lot of work, and again, if I look at it personally from my perspective, I would say like it seems very organic and it wasn't kind of planned or anything. From an outside perspective, it might look quite different. So internally, I'll probably say studying and getting a degree both in Pakistan but also here definitely helped, and that was like a key milestone to be university educated. As we know, not many people have that privilege, not just in Pakistan but also coming to a different country and doing that. I think secondly, really getting an opportunity to be accepted into kind of starting your own business or starting the social enterprise was like a key milestone for me. So Catalysr, I would say going to NASA, going to some of these other programs that I've been a part of have been really good milestones, but also learning opportunities for me personally to be able to improve myself, but also learn about new skills and kind of get the right mentoring. I'd say some awards have been really influential. So the Commonwealth Award that you mentioned, it was such a huge thing and such an unexpected thing that really opened a lot of doors internationally, but also in Australia, and still does to this day. So that really helped in a lot of ways in terms of, like so for example, we're struggling with funding initially with Catalysr because we're a new organization. People didn't know about us, but then when you get an award, get recognized, there are people who you're talking to already, but they see your validation and they fund you and things like that. So those are the kind of things that really help. I would say in terms of other milestones, also looking at the success of some of our alumni that have gone through Catalysr. And so looking at specifically, obviously you can start a company or run something and you try to support other people to build their own business, but you can only do so much from your perspective. But then if they go from there and really use that as a launch pad to go to another organization or raise more funding or, hire more people, as you're saying, grow the company, those milestones, I mean, yes, it's not directly all of our effort, but really that like I sort of see them personal milestones as well, or professional milestones that help us not just tell our story, but also help tell their story as well. So lots of different milestones, but I think some of the key ones that I already mentioned.
Interesting. This is all basically it's a network, right? This is Usman and it's his network. That's the alumni from GIK, from the university in Australia, then also Catalysr and SpaceBase, and so it's all a network. And this is a question I keep getting multiple times, which is how do you actually network? That's the first part of it. How do you go outside and network? We are talking people who are experienced, like 5-10 years experience, but they have been just sitting and coding the whole day, like for the last 5-10 years. And We both know most of the times developers are introverts. They don't want to go to conferences. They don't want to talk to people. But recently as well, like I think a week or 2 weeks ago, I got this question again. How do you network?
Again, like if you look at it from the outside, you might think that I'm an extroverted person who likes to network with everyone. I'm not. I'm also very introverted, which again oftentimes comes as a surprise to many people. But I think for me, the reason why I got lucky with this is because I was involved with clubs and societies, particularly in Pakistan, in Jiki and other things. So that was a good opportunity to kind of build some small network, but also learn how to work with different people, build those relationships. ISEC was another one that was involved in really in the early days at Jiki as well, which really helped kind of train us. But I think the biggest thing when you're doing networking is you have to get out of your comfort zone a little bit. So it's a learned skill. It's not something that, you just do it. It's kind of like when you're learning how to code, as an example, if you're a coder or an engineer, you will write really bad code in the beginning, right? You would have no idea. You'll have to practice, debug a lot, learn from a lot of people, right? It might take you, 10,000 hours to do it. It's kind of the same thing with networking. It will take a long time. But the other thing is, it's when you're thinking about networking, like oftentimes people have this idea, like say you go to an event that you want to go and meet with everyone and try to get to as many business cards as possible, really try to get to know people. But I would say personally, what I find more useful is even say you go to an event, and even if you can build like one or two really high quality relationships through that event or that kind of thing, that's fantastic, right? So even if you can meet one or two people, but have like a more longer conversation, a more deeper conversation, trying to understand what kind of, gets them excited, what are they interested in, that's what will help you build like a more deeper relationship. At the end of the day, you have to connect with people as a human, and something, if you're interested in say coding and you want to even go to other people who are coding and join their networks, that's something you can do. But it's always thinking about, what is it that you're trying to get out of this is important, but at the same time, what can you give? I think it's really important to have that give and take. Oftentimes people think from their own personal perspective, well, what can I take out of this relationship? But when you go into a networking kind of situation or when you're meeting people, it's like, how can you help them? And if you have that giving mindset of, look, I'm speaking to this person, I want to learn about who they are, what they're doing, and how I can help them, and you do that, oftentimes, that will come around because there's a lot of karma and that kind of comes back. But then secondly, they will introduce you to their own network, and that's how you kind of build it, right? So it's not organic. It takes a lot of effort and time. There's some ready-made networks that you can plug into, so some organizations that I mentioned that I got involved in, that could be a good way for people to get involved in, and like a ready-made network that I guess there's a lot of people that put a lot of effort into containing and managing the network. But then if you want to build your own network, it's just basically one conversation at a time, have a lot of coffees with people. If you're an introvert, have a lot of one-on-ones. You don't have to have all of them at one time. Like you can have like one coffee a week or something really simple with a new person. Just try to understand them and have that relationship. So whatever you're comfortable with, do that, but then sometimes also put yourself out of the comfort zone because that will help you kind of, with growth generally. But it's a learned skill, it's a practice. So you have to do it over and over again.
That's good advice. I mean, the thing is, a lot of times I'm telling people, if you're not comfortable, right, just start it slowly. Take one step at a time, because if you keep sitting at home and not just thinking about it, you're procrastinating, right? And the second question, the same person asked me, Majid, okay, cool, I will go to a conference and then I will add this person on LinkedIn. What is the frequency that I should say hi to them? Maybe you can just wish them a new year a new year, or maybe if their birthday pops up, just say them, or just ask them, hi, how are they doing? Or just ask them for a coffee. Even if you have nothing to sell, or you're not seeking advice, or you have nothing to offer for them, just have a conversation with them. Maybe you will find some synergy during the call. So what are your perceptions about this?
Yeah, I would say for me personally, I would always go with the mindset of how can I help them? And I mean, I think after doing it for a while, it's even just kind of having that chat initially when you're meeting with someone in person or whatever. But even if you haven't had that initially and just got to know who they are, just connecting them is fine. Sometimes you will see that you're connected with someone but might not have something to do with them for a while. But then if some opportunity comes up, you might realize, okay, this, for example, I mean, in business context, it happens a lot where we've got this particular funding or this particular business opportunity or whatever. Who do I know who can do this? Or someone is hiring, and then you might know someone who needs a job, or you're hiring and you want to ask people to recommend. So those kind of things that are obvious ones. But I guess in other contexts, it's basically, even if you think you can't help them, it's always good to ask, like, what do they need help with? And sometimes they just want someone who can listen to them and kind of give them ideas or advice. And sometimes they want people who are not in their industry as well, right? So if you're working in the space sector or energy sector, you might want to hear from someone who's in the not-for-profit world or some other world because you want to hear a different perspective. Or if you are a marketing person, you want to hear from someone who's building a product or is a coder or whatever, because you want to understand how the different people view that product. And so I think that's the kind of thing where you might think you might not have value to add, but you often do. And so it's always good to ask without having an expectation that they're going to pay you or that there will be something in return, but just really genuinely trying to understand what is their challenge, what are they dealing with, how you can help them. And many times you can help them, sometimes you can't, and that's fine. Sometimes you can help them directly by telling them something. Sometimes if you build a bit of a network, you can connect them to someone else in your network, which then strengthens both of those people's relationship with you because they both benefit. One person who's trying to solve a problem, one person who can solve it for them and then can get some benefit. So those are the kind of things that I would normally do, is just like try to understand what they're looking for. And if I can help them or if I can connect them with something, then I'll definitely do that because that's a good way to kind of continue that relationship. But otherwise, like wishing a happy birthday and things like that, you're right, that's kind of a good way to stay in touch. But it's a hard one, right? Because you meet with so many people and it's really hard to kind of, wish like 100 people or 1,000 people happy birthday, particularly on LinkedIn. But I think it's more the who are the people that you want to connect with more? What do you want to do? And if you can get a coffee or any of those things, that will be really fantastic.
That's true. I'm always trying to. Now I have made this new habit, like where I learned this from the crypto world, where if I meet you, for example, at a conference, I will take a picture with you and immediately send that picture to you with a note. That's where we met, and we think this could be a potential synergy. Whatever it is, if I am helping them or they are helping me, so whatever it is, we write it down, and then afterwards, whenever you open the message, you see, okay, cool. Or you can, whenever you're searching on LinkedIn messages that, hey, I need, for example, a head of product, you will see this message popping up that this guy could be a good product person, So things like this, you have to apply like hacks or techniques, that you learn from all different kind of industries. But moving on now, you come from Pakistan, it's a very different culture as compared to Australia. Like, I'm not sure, but when I see Germany and Pakistan, they're opposite, like very different in a lot of things. So how has working in different cultural environments actually shaped your decision making or innovation strategies in general?
Yeah, so I mean, I've done a little bit of work in Pakistan, but I was very lucky that I also had an opportunity to work through ISEC or do some internships in other places. So I did some internship in Indonesia when I was at uni in GK. I also did an internship in Russia, which also helped. So to be able to get that, global context or different context from Pakistan, what I would say is that it definitely has helped a lot because what I'm doing right now is really try to be able to help people from different diverse cultural backgrounds. And I wouldn't be able to do it if I did not understand differences and how to work with different people, even within Pakistan, so studying in a university like GK, which is a national university where people come from all over Pakistan, meeting different cultures, different languages, different people, different habits, is a great way to kind of connect with people from different backgrounds. And I feel like that experience has translated into what exactly I'm doing today, is to be able to help people from around the world. So I think that's one thing that's, I guess, is a direct thing. I think obviously business culture and work culture is quite different, but it's one of those things where, wherever you're working or operating, you've got to learn that, how to work and learn that environment. So I'm sure like when you're doing work in Germany, you're very different from Pakistan or in Australia. And so it's again, something that, you need to do over time and then you learn. But also I think for me, it is not just learning that myself, but also with Catalysr, also helping other people that are coming into Australia, also understanding the key differences of, very simple things like when you have a meeting with someone, what time do you rock up at? Do you rock up half an hour late? Do you rock up half an hour early? Do you just come on time? I know it sounds really simple, but it's not. Paying tax, having insurances, these kind of simple basic things are quite different to different countries. And so those are things that you need to know and you need to be aware of, both in terms of, I guess, what your responsibilities are, what's kind of expected of you, but also what are the consequences, right? Because if you don't do them right, some of the kind of unwritten rules and that will affect you in your business generally. Some of them are kind of hard-coded laws that if you don't follow, then you will be in trouble. So I think for me, it's just taken some time to learn that. But I was lucky in the sense that I came here and I studied and went to university. And after doing a master's, that was kind of a softer landing, where someone might come here directly on a different kind of visa, and then they don't really have a clue of how to get involved. So for me, because I came in through university, that really helped me learn about a lot of stuff. Universities have different, workshops, trainings, networking sessions, speed dating, all those kind of things that you do as a way to learn the culture. And get mentoring and so on. Whereas I think if you're just coming directly, it's a bit hard. So I've used that to learn, but now I'm trying to kind of pass it on as well.
That's very cool. Because we are also almost out of time. I have a few last quick questions. Like one is about what kind of startups do you normally invest in? I'm sure because you mentioned investor, there would be a lot of people listening and okay, do I send in my pitch deck or no?
Great question. So I guess in the same vein of what I was mentioning with Catalysr. So with Backbone Partners, it's a new fund which has a mandate to invest specifically in immigrant entrepreneurs that are based in Australia. So if you're an immigrant entrepreneur, you're starting a business that's a tech startup, so it has to be tech because it's a startup that can grow it in a commercial fund. It will be pre-seed and seed stage, so really early stage, I guess, companies that we fund. And in terms of what kind of industry it can be, it's very agnostic, could be anything, but it has to be an Australian company. So obviously, if you're somewhere else, if you want to move to Australia, great, then you can be involved. We can help you with that as well, because we connected with different kind of, I guess, legal agencies or organizations that can help you with visas and migration agents and so on. We don't do that ourselves, but like there are other players who can do that. But if you want to set up a business in Australia, and if you want to raise capital for it, if it's a tech company, doesn't matter what industry it is, and it has a large global market, then we will definitely look at that and can sort of invest in you.
I'm sure there would be many people listening to us who are either trying to do entrepreneurship or are juggling right now. They're working in industry and thinking of making the switch. Should they make the switch or no? What advice would you give them? Maybe two advices. One for someone who's thinking going all in, and the second one for someone who's thinking I keep my stable job and do like an MVP or a POC, for my idea.
It's one of those things where I think it really depends on your personal situation. Don't believe everything you see on the internet. So there's a lot of people that are there to sell you snake oil. And there's a lot of kind of hype around startups and entrepreneurship as well. Number one, startups are really, really hard. So you should ask yourself, why do you want to do it? Like your why, your purpose needs to be really, really strong. If it's just about, I want to just make more money, there's lots of ways in doing that. And this might not be the way. So really the ones that I've seen that are kind of resilient and can stay through are the ones that really want to solve a problem, or really someone that's really passionate about a particular project. So if you're that kind of person, I'd probably say that's one thing to keep in mind. Don't just do it for the sake of doing it because other people are doing it. The second thing I'll say is, what kind of future do you want to have, right? So if you want to have a future where you're looking at like lots of return, like a really large, I guess, sum of return, then you can think about, well, I can potentially go that high growth startup route. What that means is that you can potentially go all in, spend a lot of time and effort, try to build something unique, grow it, scale it, sell it. The challenge is that the success rate is quite low. And so, if you're unsuccessful, then you probably lose a lot. But then there's a lot of learnings that come out of it, and you still have good employment opportunities and so on. But it's a ridiculously hard work. So if you're that kind of person who just wants to go all in, just know that there are risks associated, financial risk, personal risk, mental health, all those kind of things that you need to be aware of. Especially if you have a family, I think that's another thing to kind of keep in mind, because you might not be able to support them for a little while if you're going down that path. And the payout may or may not happen. It might happen for some people, but then if you're an investor, it's great. But if you're a founder, you can be a part of the 90%. You might want to be part of the 10%, but you can still be part of the 90%. So just know that. On the other hand, when you are, if you want to keep your job, do it kind of more organically. As you said, build a proof of concept or an MVP and test your ideas, see whether this has potential, and then grow it. And then you can probably decide whether you want to take it that high growth route or you want to do it as like a traditional small business. I think in my mind, personally, I probably would prefer that, because for me, but also I think that's for many people that might be a better solution, which I know many VCs won't give you that advice, because I think from a founder's perspective, you should take care of yourself first, right? And you should know your own kind of situation, and you should be able to test and see whether something works before you kind of go all in, put all your eggs in one basket. Once you know that it works, that's a good chance, I guess, opportunity for you to make a decision whether this is something that you want to go scale really quickly and grow really fast, or whether you want to make it into a small business. But I think many people kind of see them as separate routes very early. But I think you can do the testing, you can build something initially, even if it takes a bit longer, and really test and validate that, rather than going all in too quickly, because I think there's a big risk there as well that you might lose out everything.
Nicely said. That sometimes you need to say, because I just was talking to a VC a few weeks ago, I think last year actually, not even a few weeks ago, and his first requirement was leave your job. And the second one was that you are not going to get any salary. So, and I was thinking, so if a married guy with kids actually ends up leaving his job and tries to put a startup together, how would he survive? Because it's the cost of living in a country like Germany or Australia, it's a lot. Like, I mean, how long of a runway will you have? 6 months, maybe 7 months, but sometimes startups take an year, 2 year, 3 year. I have seen startups that are running since 2018 and still not profitable. So they are on the way. They are making 70, 80 million, per year, but they're still not profitable. It takes them time. The question then becomes more individuality, which brings me on to my last question. So what are your long-term goals and visions that you have set for yourself?
I think just to pick up on that last point that you mentioned really quickly on the VC telling you leave your job and also don't pay yourself, I think that's really bad advice personally. I think it's if you go all in, great, but even then you still have to pay yourself at least a minimum wage or some basic kind of amount so that you can survive, right? Without that, if there's no you, there's no startup as a founder, right? So that's one thing. If you have a lot of savings and you can afford that, great, but many people can't. And the other, I guess, option is some of those VCs invest in really young people, like university or kind of high school, because that's when they know that the people they can live off their parents and they might be able to do it. And that's why some of the startups that get funding are the ones that are, I guess, people from rich families. But I think if you come from middle class, or if you're a migrant and you're just setting up, I think that's really bad advice, because the problem with that is that then if you can't sustain yourself, you can't sustain your startup, because you'll be worried about your own cash flow every single day, and that's not the right mindset to be able to growing something new and building something new and innovating. So yes, that would be one thing to keep in mind. The question that you asked, which is what are my long-term vision and goals, I'd say the things that I'm really passionate about. So I mentioned climate change, I mentioned kind of the migration, refugee crisis, and I've also mentioned space as kind of the things that I'm interested in. I guess coming back to that climate point, we know that climate change is something that's been happening for a while now, and it's only increasing, right? So I personally am deeply interested in solving or working on solutions to climate change, both kind of mitigation and adaptation. And I think the work that I'll be doing for the next 30, 40, 50 years will be focused on that. Now, specific solutions or specific projects might be different. So with Catalysr as an example, of the work that we're doing on the migration side, it's a different work, and some of the other industries might be different. So broadly speaking, I'll be working on that, I guess, that problem. Specifically with Catalysr, so when we started back in 2016, I guess we were one of the first ones, if not the only ones, that existed that was particularly an incubator for supporting migrant and refugee entrepreneurs. Now, obviously, migrants have been running businesses and starting businesses forever, so that wasn't a new concept. But the incubator thing was kind of popularized by Y Combinator in the US, and that was still relatively new in like 2015, 2016. It wasn't that old, and that really came out of the financial crisis and so on in the US. But then, similar to our timeline, there's other organizations in the world that are also starting up, so in the UK, in Germany, other places that are doing similar stuff. So we, I guess, got together, got to know each other, and now there's a global refugee entrepreneurship network that's been set up as well, which we are a part of. I was actually one of the founding members, and we are supporting each other in terms of learning our programs with impact measurement. We're doing some of that work, and so our goal is to make that network even bigger. We've got, I think, people from like 50 different organizations globally that are doing that now, and the goal is to grow that more. For us at Catalysr, we also want to expand our program to different countries. We've already done some expansion into New Zealand, but there are more opportunities for us to do that in Europe, in the US, in Latin America, Africa, and so on. But that's the long-term vision. And then I guess on other climate stuff and space stuff, I think space, again, I am not the kind of person who just wants to do space for space's sake. Like, it's not like, oh, it will be really cool if we went to Mars and have a civilization there. I think space can play a huge role in helping us understand our planet. And, if you can't measure something, you can't really fix it, or you can't really improve it. So for us, space is a really good tool to measure what's happening in the health of our planet from climate change perspective. And so when I look at space, I look at space technology to solve the problems that we have here on Earth, rather than taking and exporting everything to space. And so that's the kind of future that I want to look at, into how do we have more people get access to that, so then they can also solve their problems in their own local community, in their own local context, using space technologies, using technology generally, but then also, particularly focus on that climate problem generally.
That's a cool goal. A lot of goals, actually. And I'm very positive you will achieve them all. And I would be basically watching the journey of success, and joining you in celebrating your milestones, and
Thank you.
congratulating you every time. And so this comes to an end. But thank you so much for joining again, Usman. That has been truly inspiring and very insightful. And I'm very grateful that you shared a lot of knowledge, experience, because these are things people actually want to listen to. They want advice. They are confused. Maybe your problem from yesterday was someone's problem tomorrow, So when you share these solutions, these actually help people. So I'm again very grateful. Would you like to share something as a closing remark for our audience?
Yeah, I guess my main remark is that for anyone who's listening to this, if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to start something new, what I would say is get started. So that doesn't mean you leave a job, you leave everything on the line, but you can do something simple, right? You can learn about new things, you can start thinking about a problem you want to solve, and just start tinkering, doing something. Get started. Many people really are thinking that someone's going to invite them, or someone's going to tell them this great opportunity comes up. It doesn't. You have to take the initiative. You have to be proactive. So just get started. I think that's the key thing. We're particularly going to start a business. Just get started, do something, and you'll learn from that. Even if it fails, you'll be able to learn and improve and then grow. And there's never a better time right now. There's a lot of funding available. There's a lot of support available. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. Australia, Germany, it doesn't matter. You can really access a lot of that support and funding. Investors and many people are looking for really good ideas with big problems. So hopefully you can solve some of those problems. So just get started and do something.
Awesome. That's valuable advice. Thank you. To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning into the executives this week. If you found this episode valuable, don't forget to subscribe. Also leave a comment. Or if you agree or disagree with Usman, and share it with your network. Until next time, this is Majid signing off.